Hi, it's Mr. Ramage, and this video lesson is going to take a very quick look at President Roosevelt and American expansionism during his presidency. For the purpose of this video lesson, I'm going to be utilizing this standard from the state of Ohio for American history. And the standard is, as a result of overseas expansion, the Spanish-American War, and World War I, the United States emerged as a world power. So in terms of the overseas expansion, we're going to look at some things connected to President Roosevelt, specifically the Roosevelt Corollary and the creation of the Panama Canal. We'll also talk a little bit here about the Monroe Doctrine, which will also be helpful for students to understand. So if we begin back with the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, this was a doctrine issued by President James Monroe to address some issues that European nations were trying to reclaim lands and territories in the Americas. And the Monroe Doctrine is just simply a statement to the world, specifically targeting those European countries, that said, hey, we need you to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. From the doctrine it says, the American continent, by the free and independent condition which they have assumed and maintained, are henceforth not to be considered as subjects for colonization by any European powers. That the Western Hemisphere would be essentially America's sphere of influence. If there were issues in this part of the world, America would handle it. America wants European powers out of our part of the world, and America wants to assert its dominance as an emerging nation in the Western Hemisphere. So some visualization of that here, right? I do love my political cartoons. We can see these European powers to the left, across over in Europe, and over here good old Uncle Sam on the right with a no trespassing America for American sign, and a few smaller South and Central American countries that he is protecting. And here we have Uncle Sam astride the American continents, firmly placing his right foot on Alaska and his left foot down in South America, and in his hand, essentially, the Monroe Doctrine, drawing that line and using the doctrine to enforce American dominance over this part of the world. And this one featuring John Bull from England and Kaiser Wilhelm from Germany, drawing a line in the sand. We have a firm, strong-looking Uncle Sam who's drawn a line in the sand that actually spells out the Monroe Doctrine, challenging these European powers to step over that line and see what happens to you. So in 1904, President Roosevelt is going to add on to this Monroe Doctrine with what he calls the Roosevelt Corollary. And essentially, it's an extension of what was already established as part of the Monroe Doctrine. It's going to extend American influence and power over the entire Western Hemisphere. We're no longer just interested in European powers staying out of our part of the world, but essentially exerting a lot more influence and control over our part of the world. This is post-Spanish-American War. We have already taken control of the island of Puerto Rico. We have influenced and have some control over the island of Cuba, and we're looking to expand that further south throughout the rest of the continent. So, according to the corollary, if any nation were to engage in, quote, chronic wrongdoings, such as going into debt or experiencing civil unrest, then the United States would intervene in those nations in order to stabilize and bring peace to the region. So if something was happening in a foreign nation that the United States felt was sort of unbalancing things in the Western Hemisphere or could potentially lead to some sort of conflict or escalation, that we would go down there and we would solve it for them, to help them out, to extend our hand of friendship and goodwill in order to try to stabilize things in this part of the world. That the Roosevelt Corollary gave the United States international police power in flagrant cases of such wrongdoing or impotence, is what the language says. So America's going to emerge through this Roosevelt Corollary as sort of this policeman of the Western Hemisphere, that we are the ones who are going to basically solve everybody's problems. So we are going to establish some form of authority over foreign and sovereign nations, which again, we don't really have the right to do, but in this age of imperialism, driven by racism and manifest destiny, America's assuming this leadership role in the world and taking it upon itself to guide everybody to what America believes is a beneficial solution or conclusion. This ties into Roosevelt's big stick policy, which is often referred to as part of his foreign diplomacy or his plan for America's role in the world. This big stick policy, based on the African proverb, speak softly and carry a big stick, you will go far. That Roosevelt and America will try to resolve issues peacefully, which is the speak softly part, but will always have that big stick right there to enforce their way. So again, this big stick kind of emerges as the growing and strengthening United States Navy. So Roosevelt, big fan of the U.S. Navy, was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy prior to the breakout of the Spanish-American War. And we can see here Roosevelt with his big stick, like a big kid down at the beach playing in the sand and in the surf, and he's pulling behind him his Navy, which has a few things on it there, like debt collector there towards the bottom. The caption is "The Big Stick in the Caribbean Sea," that Roosevelt's going to influence what happens in the Caribbean through the use of his Navy, just like a little kid playing around. Well, that brings us to the Panama Canal, which is a extremely long story. We're just going to do a very small part of it. The Panama Canal has been sort of the dream to create a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to avoid a very long sea route of 13,100 miles between New York and San Francisco. And building this canal would benefit the United States, giving it an increased economic and military influence not only in the Western Hemisphere, but pretty much globally. As we're moving towards more global trade, the United States' control of a canal connecting two oceans together would be massively important. Also, militarily, being able to move ships from one ocean to the other will be a huge advantage for the United States. And controlling that canal would be, again, a very, very important thing for the United States to have. And this is not really the first time that we've tried to build this canal. Going back to the presidency of William McKinley, we were moving towards building a canal in this proposed Nicaragua area in Central America. We can see in the cartoon McKinley rolling up his sleeves and about to get the digging done as Uncle Sam is anxious and excited in the back as he says to McKinley, "Finish the canal, McKinley, and make our national expansion complete in your first administration." But things bogged down, and again, we're not really going to get into all the details of the canal. But eventually the idea is that the Isthmus of Panama would be a very good location for the canal. But the problem is that Panama was not its own nation yet. It was a territory controlled by Colombia. So what is President Roosevelt to do? In his State of the Union in 1902, Roosevelt said, "No single great material work which remains to be undertaken on this continent is of such consequence to the American people as the building of a canal across the isthmus connecting North and South America. It is emphatically a work which it is for the interest of the entire country to begin and complete as soon as possible. It is one of those great works which only a great nation can undertake, with prospects of success, and which when done are not only permanent assets in the nation's material interests, but standing monuments to its constructive ability." So to Roosevelt, the canal was everything. It was a symbol of American ingenuity and American accomplishment and American success, as well as giving America a huge control over trade and business and movement of materials in this part of the world. Well, in 1902, the United States is going to try to make this move to build the canal in Panama by buying the rights to the French canal property and equipment for $40 million, which is very expensive back in 1902. But Panama in this area was now under the control of Colombia. So the United States made a $10 million offer to Colombia to purchase the rights to the area and, just basically buy it outright. Colombia replied, wanting not $10 million, but $25 million for simply access to the canal zone and not even ownership of the canal zone. Roosevelt obviously was very upset by this and decides that he's going to just do things differently, which is basically for the United States to go down there and to support a revolutionary movement in Panama and overthrow the Colombian government and kick it out of the Panamanian territory and then give the United States access to the canal, which is basically what happens. Again, it's a really long, complicated story. We're just doing a real quick summary of that here. So helping the Panamanians gain their independence is great, but In the Panamanian Constitution, which the U.S. essentially helps Panama write, it says that the United States has the right to intervene in any part of Panama to reestablish political peace and constitutional order, and out of that comes our ability to now build the Panama Canal. So, nice little cover from Harper's Weekly showing President Roosevelt in his dealings with the Colombians. Over here on the left, we've got millions of dollars for the canal in his satchel, while the figure that represents Colombia is drawn, again, very stereotypically. He's got his guns. He's a thief. He's a robber. He's tried to hold up the wrong man. So we see Roosevelt, tall and proud, grabbing the Colombia guy by the throat. And then Uncle Sam's even in the background cheering him on, very happy. And Uncle Sam's got his shovel, which means he's ready to start digging. So again, the story of how America gains access to the canal is very interesting. I encourage you to dive into it a little bit. But with our support, Panama becomes its own nation. Colombia loses control of Panama. The U.S. gains control of the Canal Zone. And of course, as we've already seen with the Roosevelt Corollary, influence over the nation of Panama moving forward. So America now gets to build the canal, which is another amazing story, and I encourage you to check it out. We see Roosevelt here dressed in his Rough Rider outfits, leading the charge to dig the canal, and instead of guns and horses, we've got shovels. Again, a great cartoon here with Roosevelt's face on the digging machine. Roosevelt was beloved by political cartoonists. He actually goes down and visits the Canal Zone and operates one of the diggers. Roosevelt said, "The Panama Canal would not have been started if I had not taken hold of it, because if I had followed the traditional or conservative method, I should have submitted an admirable state paper occupying a couple of hundred pages, detailing all the facts to Congress and asking Congress's consideration of it. In that case, there would have been a number of excellent speeches made on the subject in Congress. The debate would be proceeding at this moment with great spirit, and the beginning of work on the canal would be 50 years in the future. Fortunately, the crisis came at a period when I could act unhampered. Accordingly, I took the isthmus, started the canal, and then left Congress not to debate the canal, but to debate me." So Roosevelt goes about doing this stuff with the canal kind of on his own, without congressional approval. And he makes his case very clear here. He's not hiding it. Hey, I did this, I took it, it needs to get done, so it's getting done. You guys can argue about it all you want, but it's already going forward. And the last thing we're going to wrap up with in this presentation is a look at the Great White Fleet. Roosevelt is going to send 16 American battleships on this round-the-world goodwill trip, beginning in December of 1907 and lasting all the way to February of 1909. So we want to show off American ingenuity, American military might, American naval might, to take these battleships, which are painted white so that they stand out against the water and the horizon, so that nobody will miss them and nobody will be able to ignore them, around the world as a big, big flex of American muscle and American military might, to show the world that America can basically reach any other part of the globe with its military strength. So America, again, a young, up-and-coming power. Roosevelt sends that power out to be seen by the other powerful nations in the world. They spend a lot of time in the South Pacific, which is an area where we're continuing to expand our influence. And of course, we have to end it with a great political cartoon. We see the Great White Fleet out and about, the caption of peace at the bottom, while we have Columbia in her suit of armor and her sword. And also the doves of peace holding the bolts and sword as well. And then, of course, Roosevelt's big face on the leading ship, going and bringing peace to the world. And some takeaways from what we should know about Roosevelt and imperialism. We've got the Roosevelt Corollary, which adds on to the Monroe Doctrine and takes America's power and influence in the Western Hemisphere and increases it, whereas America now becomes this international policing power. Roosevelt is going to aggressively and maybe unconstitutionally take control of the area of Panama and build the Panama Canal, and the canal itself increases America's ability to control trade and have economic influence and have military influence, not only in the Western Hemisphere but also globally. And the Great White Fleet is Roosevelt's flex to the world that America is a growing military power that needs to be taken seriously. Hey, thanks for watching this video lesson, and I hope you learned something.